Hi everyone, meteorologist Brian Bennett. Here's the very latest on Hurricane Dorian for your Saturday, August 31st. First of all, let's get straight to it. We have some great news. The National Hurricane Center and the majority of computer models now have the center of circulation remaining offshore of Florida, which means that a landfall would not be officially occurring in the state of Florida, and that is some great news. With that said, if you will hang with me for just a moment and just know that Florida is still in the cone of uncertainty, and we know these hurricanes can wobble. We know they can be unpredictable. Remember Charlie back many years ago? Now, computer models have improved quite a bit since Charlie, but regardless, storms can wobble and unpredictable things can happen. So, if you live on the east coast of Florida, you need to continue to have your drinkable water, your non perishable foods ready to go. You need to be prepared to evacuate at moment's notice. You would want to head westward. Preferably, you don't want to be out in hurricane conditions, so very important to stay tuned to your local forecast, and I'll continue to have updates as well. But you do need to be ready to evacuate if suddenly it looks like the storm is going to wobble inland a little bit. Again, Florida still in the cone of uncertainty, meaning that a landfall is possible. But for now, let's rejoice in the fact that the models and the Hurricane Center now have the most damaging winds that will be blowing around 140 miles per hour. Those are now looking like they're going to stay offshore. All right, stay with me just for one more moment here, and let me show you that we will have to worry about the Carolinas because a landfall will be possible there. Secondly, even with the storm offshore, this is a very slow moving storm. Storms rotate counterclockwise. That means that we're going to be looking at an extended period of onshore winds. So, very large waves, beach erosion, rip currents, and even some significant storm surge is still a possibility with this prolonged period of onshore winds on the east coast of Florida. So, evacuation would still be a wise thing to do if you're in an area that's especially prone to flooding, especially as you get up into parts of Jacksonville and maybe even parts of Georgia as well. So just keep that in mind as well, that even though the storm may be moving offshore, we're still looking at the possibility for a large storm surge. All right, this picture was taken from the GOES East satellite about 5 minutes ago, showing a very healthy looking storm. Looking at the infrared satellite imagery, let me slide this over so you're not looking at a Keebler ad for cookies. And you can see that we have a very tight eye here. We have a nice looking eye wall circulating and reforming around the center of circulation, not encountering much wind shear or dry air. So a very favorable environment. Also, the storm is moving into some very warm and deep waters around the Bahamas. So this storm is going to maintain its strength, if not even strengthen a little bit, as it continues to move off to the west. All right, so who do we have to thank or to pay off for this storm potentially not making landfall in the state of Florida? The reason being is the storm is moving much slower than originally forecast. This orange color here is high pressure. This blue is Hurricane Dorian. Dorian cannot go through that high pressure. Instead, that high pressure is going to build down like we expected it to always do. Nothing has changed here, but what has changed is now Dorian is back here instead of back here. If the storm was faster, then we would see Dorian most likely crash right into Florida and maybe even make its way over Tampa Bay, maybe even back into the Gulf of Mexico. But with a slower storm, watch what happens. Now we're going to see that high actually start to break apart a little bit and erode on the western side. That allows a trough to move in, an area of low pressure, and that kind of helps to pull the storm to the north a bit. And that can be our saving grace, which will potentially allow the storm to not make landfall in Florida. But again, going back to emphasizing that storms are unpredictable and we need to be on guard for a potential landfall still occurring. But at the same time, we can rejoice in the likelihood that this storm may remain just offshore. Again, Carolinas, you got to keep an eye out for the possibility of the storm moving your direction as well. Another feature that's been allowed to develop because of a slower storm oops, didn't mean to click on that, would be this high pressure over the Gulf of Mexico. That's going to help to kind of act like a wall to push the storm a bit farther east as well. So several factors have developed because of the slower storm now wanting to keep the storm off the coast of Florida. The European model, as you probably know, I'm sure you heard this yesterday, the European model said, hey, I think this storm's going to remain offshore. And I always say that the European model is the workhorse. It is the awesome computer model that does the best with hurricanes, but it hasn't been 100% the same every day. It hasn't been an agreement every single afternoon. So I was a little hesitant to buy yesterday, but today now is the second day where we've seen the storm remaining offshore. In addition to that, the GFS model, the American model, is saying the storm will remain offshore. And so we have several models now saying that the storm will remain off the east coast of Florida. So now I can start to buy it into this a little bit more, but do so obviously in a precautionary manner, knowing the unpredictability of these storms. All right, so if this track ends up prevailing, then this is what we can expect. First of all, the Bahamas, unfortunately, are looking at some rough weather. The storm is going to practically stall over the Bahamas for a day or so, which means we're looking at wind gusts to maybe 140 miles per hour for a very long period of time, huge storm surge, so a somewhat unprecedented storm for parts of the Bahamas. Now, going into the future, here we are Tuesday afternoon, and you can see Miami is getting some wind gusts, 30, 40 miles per hour. Nothing that a normal thunderstorm wouldn't drop based on this current path. Tampa Bay, same thing, maybe a wind gust to 30, maybe a little bit more gusty at the area coastlines with the unabated wind, but nothing we haven't seen before. Go forward in future. Here we are Wednesday morning. Cape Canaveral, Melbourne could see a wind gust of maybe 50, 60 miles per hour. Maybe out on the end of Cape Canaveral could see wind gust reaching hurricane force. But that's with that storm remaining just offshore. Going into the future, Jacksonville, you're looking at winds gusting to maybe 55, 60 miles per hour, a little bit stronger, maybe hurricane force winds right at the coastline, but those 140 mile per hour winds are wanting to stay offshore, at least for today's early morning computer model runs. We will get another set of model runs in later this afternoon, and I'm going to be eager to look at those to see if we're looking at the same type of thing with the storm wanting to remain offshore. I do, again, want to reemphasize that with this storm offshore, we're still looking at onshore winds, which could bring very significant storm surge flooding to more prone areas, especially upwards of around Jacksonville and maybe even coastal Georgia as well. So very strong winds possible offshore, which is where we like to keep them. Let's keep those strong winds off the coast of Florida. And let's keep that heavy rain off the coast of Florida. With an offshore storm, that means that those 2 feet of rain that were originally kind of targeting parts of Florida are now targeting the ocean. Who cares if it rains over the ocean? The fish don't care. I don't care. So that would be some great news if we're not looking at catastrophic flooding due to some heavy rain. So let's just hope that this track will continue to maintain. All right, here's a look at the European significant wave height outlook, and you can see we're still looking at some really large waves happening pretty close to the shore, not those 30 to 40 foot waves that look like they could be a possibility, but nonetheless very rough surf, beach erosion, rip currents, storm surge flooding, still a possibility up and down the east coast as the storm continues to track right along the coastline. All right, here's a look at the larger view here. And again, the Carolinas, you'll have to keep an eye out as the storm will now be possibly targeting a landfall in the Carolinas. If not, it'll be very close to making landfall. So you might want to start considering potential evacuation plans in coastal Carolinas as well. Got to give a shout out to the Japanese model, the JMA model. It actually predicted that the storm would remain offshore, and it predicted this back on Monday, so several days ago. And the Japanese model normally isn't the strongest with hurricane predictions, but hey, I guess if you're if you're wrong or right enough, eventually you're going to get one right. And the Japanese model appears to be getting this one right, which if it ends up riding off the coast of Florida, it would be the only computer model that got this one right that far out. So potentially a model to keep a closer eye on. As I mentioned, hurricanes can and do wobble. A landfall in Florida is still possible. The German ICON model actually has a a pretty bad scenario developing here where it has the hurricane coming right to the West Palm Beach area and then stalling. If that were to happen, that would bring hours of very strong winds to the Vero Beach, to the West Palm Beach area. It would bring greater storm surge flooding and just really worse conditions all the way around if the ICON model is correct and we're looking at more of a westerly track. But the ICON model has been kind of westerly all along. The European and the GFS, kind of the better workhorse models, have decided to go with a farther easterly track. I'm just trying to get it out there and make the message clear that we have some great news this morning, things to be excited about, but we do need to be prepared for the potential of a landfalling hurricane, and we do not need to let our guard down. We are in the peak of hurricane season. Just want to throw this out there real quick. I know it's not really on our mind right now, but it does look like we could see another hurricane developing in the Atlantic over the next week, week and a half or so. But that's a long way off, and we don't know that that's even going to make its way as far west. So right now, let's just enjoy the fact that we're looking at the possibility of Florida dodging a major bullet with a center of circulation remaining offshore, at the same time remaining optimistically cautious at the possibility that the storm could still wobble on shore. All right, I think I've gotten that message across. All right, folks, that's the latest from the overnight model runs. We'll have a new set of model runs to come out later this afternoon. I'm going to be eager to look at those and also share those with you. So please stay tuned to my feed here, and also your local officials. Continue to listen to any evacuation orders given and the local media in the area that you live in. All right, guys. Hope you have a great Saturday afternoon, and we'll talk soon, okay?